You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans and special guests, as told to Mayor Emanuel.
This is Mayor Emanuel on Chicago Stories. We're here with Eddie Bocanegra. Did I say that right? Or
yes, you did.
Okay. You're head of the Heartland Alliance and leader of READI Chicago program. Yeah. And you're a former gang member.
Yep.
And now you spend your days helping kids not either get in but also get out of a gang.
Well, kids and adults as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
I should have said adults as well. Why don't you walk people through how you got into a gang? And to me also, I want to talk about how did you get out? What was that day of atonement you talked about? And what got you behind bars? And then how'd you get out?
Sure.
That's like 7 questions. You can answer all in any order you want, okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, given the fact that we have limited time,
right. But don't worry. Take your time.
Okay.
It's important to the story and it's important to the context.
Sure. So I guess I'll start off by saying I grew up, born and raised in Chicago in a little village community, South Lawndale. And my parents immigrated here back in the 50s. And I recall the first time that I was exposed to violence was actually at home with domestic violence. And the second place that I was exposed to violence was in school. And then finally...
Where'd you go to high school, if I can ask?
Oh, I went to Bogan High School.
Bogan, okay.
Yep, right around Fort City Mall.
Yeah.
And the third time that I was exposed to violence was actually in the community. So I was about 13 years old, walking towards a local park called Petrosky Park, also known as Killer Park. And I remember walking 4:30 in the afternoon, right on 30th and Lawndale. Right in the corner, there's an elementary school that's been there for over 100 years called Gary Elementary. And I remember a young man running right in front of me just a few yards away. And right behind him was another young man. Chasing him. Except the guy that was chasing him actually had a gun. And they were both about the ages between 16, maybe 20 at most. And all of a sudden I heard some gunshots. And I saw the young man that was running behind him run back to the school courtyard and kind of disappeared. And in the intersection in the street was a young man face down, and he was dead. And I recall walking up to the body, and I recall thinking to myself, as to assume the police was around the corner, and like, where's the police, and where the neighbors, and where the adults? I remember people were looking outside their front door windows. People were stepping outside their front steps. Cars were stopping by at the intersection, but nobody actually got off and approached me or the young man. And by this time, I'm about maybe 2-3 feet standing above the man. And then I remember looking at my watch.
Was it a man, or I thought it was a...
It was a young man.
Young man.
It was a young man.
Okay. High school kid?
About a high school, I would say. He looked like between 16 and, like I said, maybe 20 at most. And I remember looking at my watch and realizing that I'm going to be late to my game. So I ran to the same courtyard. And I remember getting there and letting my friends know, hey, I just saw this guy get smoked, saw this guy get blasted. And immediately my teammates were, who was he and what gang was he from and what was his nickname? To which I had no idea really who this young man was or what gang or any of that. And then I remember my baseball coach dropping me off at home, and there was no conversation about what I had just witnessed. And I remember a few days later going to school, and there was no conversation with my school counselors or teachers about what I had just witnessed, or even at home, to say the least. And then the following year, I did join the street gang.
Which one?
And well, I'd rather not say, because then I don't want to promote.
Okay.
But it was a local gang that's been there from early 60s.
Okay.
And I remember joining the gang for 2 reasons. And as I reflect back, those reasons have never changed. One is I was the oldest of 5 siblings, and I felt that being a gang member gave me some level of autonomy, some level of ownership, some rights. So I felt that if I was in a gang, nobody would break into my dad's house, nobody would break into our car, and nobody would recruit my siblings. And so
from a protection standpoint.
Correct. So that was the first reason why I joined the gang. But the second reason, I remember watching sitcom shows like Silver Spoon and Different Strokes and so on. And I remember seeing these shows and comparing my family with their families. I remember comparing problems. And I realized at that age that the problems that we had at home weren't the same kind of problems that I was seeing in TV. And so at that point, as shameful as it sounds, I did not want to do what my father was doing for a living or what my mother was doing for a living. My dad was a mechanic. My mom worked in a factory. My neighbors were construction workers, landscapers, and working in hotels. And I just refused to do that. I did not want to do that. So naturally, my other option that I saw in my own neighborhood was actually the guys hanging on the corner. And that's how I got involved.
And then what happened in your life
So from the age of 14 to 18, I was arrested multiple times. Most of the time I was let go. And by the time I was 18, 2 of my friends were shot. Alberto, who since then had passed away, and then Ricardo, who was shot and paralyzed. And so I remember seeing my friend suffering, struggling, and I was trying to make sense of that. As in my own naive mind, thinking like this person at some point would probably walk, a miracle would happen, the medical field would discover some intervention for this. And a few months later, I realized that was not the case. So as I saw the disparity in my own friend and saw myself in terms of that, even what the gang kind of teaches you in terms of retaliation and avenging one of your so-called brothers, I went back, not with the intent of actually killing somebody, but with the intent of creating bodily harm and paralyzing somebody. And so on July 17, 1994, as I drove around in the borderline between 2 major factions, the same group that shot my friend, there was about 7 individuals standing around some houses' steps. And I remember as they were chasing my car, shooting into them, shooting one individual multiple times. And this young man's name, I found out later, is named William. William was 18 years old, single parent home, younger sister. And his family actually had moved from that neighborhood to another neighborhood to provide different life opportunities for him. And of course, I didn't realize all this till after the fact. In fact, I actually had gotten away with this case. So 30 days later, the only person that I told on this case was the person who actually ended up telling on me. And because there was also another innocent person involved with this case, at the end, I felt like up to that point, I realized what the harm that I've done, and I didn't want a second person to do time or be implicated in something that I've done. And so I remember signing a confession, even though the gangs teach you not to do that. I felt it was the right thing to do.
You wanted to protect your siblings. You wanted to, which is you just said, you signed a confession because you didn't want to see something else happen to somebody else. The other thing is you wanted to not be like your dad and mom, but you wanted to have a better life. But you also had violence at home. So there is some value, there is a moral compass in Eddie, obviously, because you've picked something else, and yet you have all these other factors. So where do you think that moral compass comes from, and how does it get nurtured, and then how does it get pushed to the side when you made some other decisions? Clearly, when you were in the gang, there must have been other counter pressures. So you have this internal moral tension. I'm not here to do therapy. I'm just trying to, but I'm trying to unpack for people because one of the things that we try to do, I've been fascinated is where do you make the turn in life where you're leading one way and you realize, you know what, these are the wrong set of choices. I'm going to go this path. And it always is there, but never fully mature or present. Is that
Yeah, Mayor. So there's a term called moral injury.
Right.
And typically moral injury is associated with veterans, particularly veterans who've gone and deployed to war. And I come from a family, I have a sister who works for the feds, and I have 3 siblings who were in the military. One who still does intelligence from the Army, 17, 18 years later. In fact, he just got back from Syria about a month ago. And so with moral injury, you have all these veterans who are given a foundation of respecting life, for example. Most of the time it's connected to your faith, whatever your faith might be. And then you're trained to defend, to protect, and then you're deployed. And it's during that deployment that you have to, it's where kind of like the rubber hits the road, so to speak, right? Because now you're going against that same moral fiber of what you were brought up as a kid, right? And you kind of have to go against that. So very similar in my case, and many similar in the cases of many of the participants and young people that I've worked with in the past, I would say that most people have a foundation, not all. And in my case, I was fortunate to have 2 parents, even if there was dysfunction in my home. But I still had both parents. And my mother...
And you think that's important?
I think it's extremely important because there needs to feel that there's a level of support at home, some guidance. And when I think about the mistakes that I've made in my life, I think about what created that, what options, what access did I have at the time. Most people would think that, well, Eddie, you had an opportunity, you had a foundation, you had both parents. But the truth is that even my own life journey, I had limited access to, right? When I mentioned the examples of my parents, what they did for a living, and my neighbors, as a 13-year-old kid, 14-year-old kid, I felt at that time that there had to be more to life than just, fixing cars, for example. Looking back now, right, I could say shamefully that I'm embarrassed to say that I felt that way at that time, right? I think people who have taken up those kind of jobs, right, they're very honorable. And for whatever reason or another, they chose to do that because of limited options as well, or education and so on. So I think for me, I had a foundation, and I made mistakes in my life because of either the pressures of the community or the pressures of the gangs or the pressures of life. And I know you're a big BAM supporter, for example, right? Huge.
You a big BAM supporter?
I am.
You can be honest. You don't have to. I do, because I think it. Finish your point and I'll come back. Go ahead.
Well, I think about what BAM does for a lot of young men is create an opportunity and space, right, to process with an adult who has lived experience in some cases or knows how to process information. When you're young, you're still thinking about identity formation. You're thinking about, how do I process information? And going back to even READI Chicago, which is what I'm entrusted to manage right now, it's how do we take the lessons learned from BAM? How do we take the lessons learned from One Summer Chicago? How do we take the lessons learned from, like, half of my staff have lived experience, but they're people with PhDs and master's degrees. And 80% of the 100 staff that are doing direct service come from the community and have very similar experience than I do.
So I've gotten myself in trouble. I don't care. I got 2 months left. What do I care? But I've gotten myself because I've advocated the importance of a two-parent home. I don't really care what family structure, but family, you can never underestimate. Even as you said, your own family had its own dynamics. It was not Ozzie and Harriet at home from a domestic tranquility. On the other hand, it had there was some moral foundation for you. Otherwise, maybe you educated yourself, but you wouldn't have learned the behavior of protecting your siblings, protecting your father and mother. And so to me, rather than describe how we got here, we should just acknowledge the importance of family in a child's life. And the reason I'm big for BAM is you only get one chance at a youth, and you need that moral guidance. Everything I've learned about being a parent comes from the person I said I would never copy, my dad. So you said it yourself that you think it's, but you do look back on it, because you have two parents and then you have a community. And yet you sought, or the gang, somewhat a replacement for the family?
I did. I felt that the gangs gave me a sense of belonging. But I want to go back to your initial question, because I think, given the opportunity, I do want to highlight something besides as parents. I think having both parents, especially they're both functional, it's an amazing thing to have. But also the extended families. I think I was fortunate to have that in my own life. And my uncle was a pastor. So as an Orthodox Christian, I could tell you that at the end of the day, what really created a change in my life was not only having the unique experience of having access as an adult post incarceration, but also I am very rooted in my faith, and I don't think things happen for the sake of happening. And so,
were you always rooted in your faith?
I was. Ironically, I would sometimes go to church as a kid with a gun, because the church that I was attending was in a rival neighborhood. But yet can you think about the irony behind it, right? I'm going to church
beyond
for service,
irony,
right? And here I am packing a gun to go to church because I needed to go to service on Wednesdays. So I think that was part of my foundation. And I think having that level of faith and trust is kind of what guided me to be where I'm at now, which is why every opportunity that I've had, Mayor, I think that I've tried to make the best of it. But I also think that I'm not the norm, I'm the exception. And I think to myself, the only difference between myself and many of the folks that we're working with is that there is people behind me pushing me, right? And I'm trying to replicate that community, so to speak.
There's a gentleman in your life who's the head of a gang who encourages you to go to college. I will tell you, not that I've studied everything or been exposed to everything, that is not the norm. That's got to be also the exception. And you have this religious background, and how important do you think having faith was in guiding you? And the third, which I really want to get to, is what light bulb goes off when you called, and maybe I'll come back to this, the Day of Atonement. I'm drawn to that because of Yom Kippur and the Jewish faith as the Day of Atonement. But you refer to that moment where you begin to atone personally, not just what society does, personally for the the crimes you've committed. So talk about college for a second, because I was fascinated when I read about this.
So
did I read it right? There was a gang leader that said you need to go to college.
You did, and
I need to get him on this show. I want to.
Well, he's doing 45 years in the feds right now, but he's someone at a very young age kind of took me under his wing, and I think he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And, skinny little kid, right, running around with glasses. And he just saw the way that I was thinking, the way that I was, thinking about forward thinking. He just saw potential in me. And so I remember in more than one occasion, he would ask other gang members not to involve me in certain things. In prison, it was the same thing. And
you guys served alongside each other?
Not in prison.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Not in prison.
But from prison, he communicated back to the gang.
And so, when he was in prison, he constantly really was trying to emphasize the importance of education. And what he was really trying to do was, for some people, this is it. This is all they're going to know. This is all their lives. But for you, Eddie, like, you see the world very differently. And again, I was a kid when he was telling me this, and I didn't see that in myself. And yet he saw that as a gang member. And just to be clear, people think that gang members or gang leaders are horrible people and so on. To me, I think that they're people that should have been running, major corporations, in government and so on.
I always tell people, I said, if they had an education and a family, they'd be running one of the largest financial institutions or law firms. I mean, incredible capacity. And it's wasted. Yeah,
I totally agree. Well, wasted to some extent, because I think that we have to figure out how do we tap into that right now.
We're going to get right to that 100%.
And so I think that was, kind of how this individual was supporting me through this process. And even in prison, constantly, reiterating the importance of education.
Why did his voice matter? Not that it mattered more, but I'm using that term. Yeah. But you have two parents. I assume your mother and father must have always encouraged an inquisitive mind. Yeah. Why did that voice resonate with you?
Well, I think two reasons. One, my parents, even though they would say you got to go to school, got to go to college, right, they didn't know what that was. To be truthful, right? They don't know the difference between UIC and UFC, even though I went to UFC, right? So they don't know the difference between that.
When the tuition bill comes, they'll know.
Oh, right. And I think that the other reason is, like, I looked up to this man, who was a few years older than I was, and I looked up to him to the point where I would listen to what he was telling me, right? Even if at times there was conflict within me, like, why is he telling me this? Like, I would think that he would probably send me off on a mission or something, but that wasn't the case.
There's a 3-year-long argument between me and my lovely bride about access to opportunity and people being able to, they have to make a decision first. They want to do something different. Yeah. And she goes, no, you have to put the opportunity in front of them. So we have this chicken and egg thing. And depending on how you answer will determine whether you get a meal at our house or not. No, but so I've had other people on. There's a gentleman who was a ex-offender, but he came back and we gave him an opportunity at CTA. We have that program. Yeah. And now he's one of the senior managers. But he's, he would say, I'm going to summarize, that he had to make a decision first before he could take that step. Yeah. Don't know what you think about that and where you would weigh down and put your thumb on the scale.
You know what? So I'm going to answer that question in two ways. Okay. Again, I want to bring it back to the guys in Greater Chicago. So a couple of years ago, there was a Tribune story, I think, that the mayor's office, your office, supported. And there's about between maybe 2,000 to 5,000 people that are driving the violence in our city. Right? This is a couple of years ago.
Big drivers, yeah. Right? They're multipliers of violence.
So right now, we have about 900 people that are in what we call the treatment group, to which for January, as the end of January, we have 380 participants that took up the job. So that's 380 out of the 2,000 to 5,000 individuals. When they come to us, they're not employable in most cases. In fact, they don't show up on time. They don't show up consistently. They definitely, substance abuse is a problem for many of them because they're self-medicating. And I could go on and on with the list. None of us should be surprised about that. There's a reason why either, as we tell people, they're disconnected from us and so on, but really we are disconnected from them. And here's the thing, that many of them aspire for what they only know. So if all they know is working a factory or cleaning up debris or driving an Uber in some cases, very few actually do that, but then that's all they really know. That's all what they've been exposed to. That's all that they could have strived for. I think about when I was in prison, Mayor, right before I left, I had wrote a business plan and I wanted to sell hot dogs. Why did I want to sell hot dogs? I said to myself, it's going to cost me $500. I'm going to buy these hot dogs. I'm going to get a little stand. I'm going to sell hot dogs in front of the county jail. Like, plenty of business there. Lawyers, clients.
A lot of foot traffic.
A lot of foot traffic, right? I said, $500. Think about it. Right now, I'm managing $20 million.
That's a lot of hot dogs.
It's a lot of hot dogs. When I was the executive director of the YMCA, I inherited $500,000 deficit, and I turned it around to a $1.6 million program. And so I asked myself, at that time, I said I was going to open a hot dog stand because I felt that I had limited opportunities. I felt nobody's going to hire me because I have a Class X background. So I have to create my own opportunities. So that was a drive, kind of to your question.
Okay.
That was a drive. Like I wanted more, but I felt that this was the limitation. So I had set my own ceiling. Now as I look back, I've only been home 10 years. I own a beautiful home, beautiful wife, 5 kids. And I think to myself, what I've been entrusted with right now to manage. And every job that I've had, including this one, Evelyn Diaz, one of your prior,
Cabinet members.
Correct, recruited me to come here. The same thing at the Y, the same thing at CRS, and so on. Now, I say that simply, Mayor, because if we're able to provide opportunities or ideas of what's possible, then we're able to instill hope. And I think what's missing in a lot of our communities is a sense of hope.
Why READI Chicago? Why did you get called to that?
When Evelyn Diaz approached me and another young woman named Candace Jones, who's now running a major foundation in D.C., they approached me and I said, I don't want to do traditional street level outreach. There's plenty of people who are doing that right now.
You don't think that's different?
I think what we're
not
doing...
That's not value, but you... Right.
Well, it is valuable.
You're
I want to go on record saying that. But I did not want to do the same thing.
Okay.
Right? I think that I believe in innovation. I believe in doing things differently. But I also believe in leveraging what we've learned. I mentioned BAM. We've learned quite a bit about kind of behavior therapy. We learned a lot about One Summer Chicago. I learned a lot through my own journey, what works, what doesn't work. Because I've been very grassroots. I know who's doing the work in the community and who's not. And I think optics is really important in all this work too, right?
Do you think who's got legitimacy versus who's BSing their way through? I said it. You can say yes or no.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. If you pop the hood under the trunk of READI Chicago, not everything is perfect, but I'll stand behind it. And everything that's not working right, we either are working on it or I've been very truthful in terms of like, here's what some of the challenges are.
Hey, look, you can't have a $20 million organization and do what your mission is and not have problems.
So,
but yeah, that's life, man.
Yep. I think for me, it is about how do we continue to support these individuals? And when I left the YMCA, I was pretty much tired of constantly fighting for dollars. We constantly have to fight for our kids.
And too much time was on the dollars and not enough about the service.
Absolutely. And that's just a part of integrity for me, just point blank. But the second thing, that this population, the 18 and older, are often overlooked. So it's easier to come to your office or to a funder and say, or anybody say, hey, I got these nice kids. They made some bad mistakes. They're still, beyond, we still could reach them. But the same thing could be said for adults. That is the truth. But we don't look at them that way.
So we had this author on last week, Alex Kotlowitz. So this to me is, I wouldn't say tension, but here's the box. And you mentioned BAM, you mentioned One Summer Chicago, 2 programs. I took One Summer Chicago and plussed it up from 14,000 to 33,000 kids, and BAM from 0, or let me just say mentoring, up to 8,000 young men. That's all on what I would call the prevention side. There's a number of advocates, READI Chicago is part of it, which is on the kind of intervention side. And I think both are valuable. I've doubled, tripled down through after school, BAM, and summer jobs on the prevention side to kind of somewhere trying to put a stick in the spoke and say, we're going to stop another generation. So where do you see that tension, and it may not be tension, but between the prevention versus intervention? And I hate to say this, but as a mayor, you kind of look at every dollar and you can't spend. You like to spend the dollar 3 times over in different places. Where would you, if you have a buck, how much would you do in intervention? And how much would you do prevention? Or would I say it this way? You're sitting across the table. We're going to have a new mayor. I've clearly over 8 years, every budget expanded after school, summer jobs, and mentoring. You sit down and you say, okay, you have a little amount of time and you have a little amount of dollars. Where are you going to spend it?
So it's ironic.
Besides everything for READI Chicago. I know it gets 100% of all that. No, but where would you, to me, this is I try to ask Alex this question. I've asked Jamal this question in the sense of, my block, my hood, my Chicago, which is, where would you spend your money on prevention or intervention? Because you can't do it. Unfortunately, we don't have enough money to do it all.
Well, maybe that's a point of disagreement, right?
It's okay.
You obviously have a budget, and
I come from a Jewish family. There ain't no agreement on nothing, even when you agree.
So I think of it this way, Mayor. I think about it, there's not one or the other, right? Obviously, and you try to find a balance between the needs, right, and how do you stop the cycle of violence. Close to 60% of our participants have children. I don't want them to follow the footsteps, the negative footprints that their parents or fathers might have had, right? But follow the positive ones beyond this point. My father-in-law is a surgeon at Rush Hospital.
Your father-in-law?
My father-in-law, surgeon at hospital. In fact, he's considered one of the best in his area, in the Midwest. When we have our dinner conversations, we talk about cancer. We talk about, stage 1, stage 2, and so on. And we do a lot of work on the prevention side. Eating diet, health, exercise, and so on. And there's a cost associated to that. But there's also a cost for those who've been diagnosed with stage 3 and stage 4. Now, they have an uphill battle to fight. And not in all cases are they going to win. But should we not continue to invest and hope that they're able to beat that cancer? As someone who has a sister who had to fight that, the cost is much more expensive. The people that are supporting that person, that patient, far exceeds the people that are supporting the person that are doing the prevention side. So I think about it from medical terms. If we take a public health approach,
but you're talking about it from a physical medical, not a mental health, which is slightly different.
It is, and it's not.
Okay.
People see me, suit and tie sometimes, right? And they'll think, Eddie, UFC graduate, you've spoken to the United Nations, traveled all over the world, this whole 9 yards,
I
right?
want to be clear, it's not UIC, it's UFC.
UFC, thank you, sir. SSA.
You went fast, I want to give you all the credit.
Thank you for that one, because it was a written program.
Yeah.
And so I ask myself this question. At the end of the day, how do we really make a difference with this population? And recognizing there's limited dollars, but I strongly believe that if somebody came to you with a strategy, just like BAM, and they said to you, hey, we've seen the effectiveness of this program, that you might raise your eyebrow and say, hey, actually, my investment might go there. In our case with READI, and I would say this for most cases, not all, but in most cases I would say, is there a study? Is there an evaluation? How do I know that if I give you $1, I'm not a rich person, but if every year my family and I get together and we invest in certain things, right? But if I'm giving $500 to something, I'm hoping I get a return of that $500. And part of what makes my wife and I decide what we give is not just a feel-good thing either. It's about how do I know that these $500, a certain percentage of it will go to like admin, but the rest of it actually goes to direct service. And then what's my return behind that direct service?
See, but here's the thing, I don't mean to do medical, but you brought up the stage 1, stage 2 cancer versus stage 3, 4. One is more critical and more expensive with a lower return. And the other one is a higher return at a lesser dollars. That's why, and I use that same, and actually I'm fine with that analogy, both medical and return. And I only say that because when you look at prevention, I don't mean to say it, but it's much more cost effective with a higher return rate. You had something, Eddie, a family, and clearly a unique gang leader who intervened in your life. And obviously an uncle with a religious leader. So you had other moral components and character components that got nurtured. The intervention side is so hard to find somebody and spend the resources to pull them out of a situation where you're literally almost have to whole cloth start again, versus somebody in 7th grade or 8th grade nurturing something before it becomes, I'm using your analogy as terms, stage 4 cancer.
Correct. And that's why I'm saying we should work with that population, rightfully so. But if I think about what does it cost for a juvenile to be detained in the corrections right now, it's about $172,000.
Right.
What's your return on investment behind that? To incarcerate an adult, it's about what, $35,000, $40,000
a year,
adults, right? So what's our return of investment for those who are coming home from prison? And for those who are not able to be employed, what is the return of investment? Are they costing us more money as taxpayers, right? Your budget, is it putting a burden?
Without a doubt.
And so then I strongly believe that often we try to justify the cost, right? Each participant in my program, it's about $20,000 roughly, $20,000. Could you imagine me just going to any foundation like, hey, by the way, I don't have the evidence, but $20,000 is what I need to support this person. Most foundations will say like, hey, $20,000, I could go to Group A over here and they'll serve 100 kids or 200 kids. But I think what's left out is that what does it really take to provide a holistic approach to that one individual and really do it in a very critical way where that person doesn't go back to prison, that person doesn't get killed or shoot somebody. When I mentioned the 380 guys, those 380 guys are from the 2,000 plus.
How do you get, I was going to ask you, how does READI Chicago get to those individuals?
So there's
And who do you lose for those 380? There's 2,000. How do you get to those 380 versus the other? Where are the other 1,700 going, and did you even have a shot at them?
So right now we've been able to identify, because there's an RCT study behind this through the University of Chicago's crime lab. So they, up to date, have about maybe 1,700 people that are in the study, to which half of them are in the treatment group. Out of that half of the treatment group, outreach has been able to engage. I want to say it's about maybe about 64% of them. So 527 people we've been able to engage from that list. So how do they come to us? They come to the Department of Corrections, the Cook County Sheriff's Office. So they've identified people who have violent offenses, gun cases, batteries, and that's who we engage. And they have to come from specific communities. The second way, we've partnered with some amazing organizations like IMC, Tenny Gross, who I believe you know from IMC, a great, thoughtful leader, LCLC, UCAN, our own Heartland folks as well, leveraging our partners to identify people who are out there driving the violence. So that's the second way. But the third way is through the University of Chicago's crime lab. So they use police data, hospital data, and a number of different data points that really identifies individuals who are at the highest risk of gun involvement. And so they get randomized in, they get sent to our outreach team, and our outreach team are playing detective.
Do you catch people, because we have a number of these call-ins that the police department does between gangs, do you catch, is the success rate easier before somebody's caught in the criminal justice system, but caught in the gang life, or is it easier when they're in the criminal justice system, they've said, okay, I've made a mistake here and I got to turn my life around? Where is your success rate, and do you have enough data? And again, this is not a science review paper or peer review paper. What do you think your success rate is? Better somebody in the gang who wants to get out, or somebody in the criminal justice system who wants to get out?
That's a really hard question to answer. I mean, the first one, I don't have the data in front of me, but I could definitely circle back to answer that question. But I think what I would like to add in response, there's this misunderstanding or a belief that the folks that are driving the violence don't want jobs. That's a lie. We underestimated. No, we underestimated the people that were actually we thought would take up the jobs.
So they want more and more people want jobs.
They want more jobs.
Right.
Mayor. They want more jobs. Here's the other thing that we also underestimated. This whole push around trauma therapy. This idea that it's really taboo in our communities to some extent, but it's always about the facilitator and how you introduce it. The truth is, they're hungry for that. When we do our kind of behavior therapy 3 times a week, like we see a lot happening there. That our own participants, after so many months, are saying like, hey, you know what, typically I would have reacted this way, but I'm thinking this way now. Part of it is because they also realize that after 18 months, we're able to place them. If they commit to the program, then we're able to place them into a full-time employment opportunity with some corporations, such as Freeman Seating, which is
You like that job? Hey, it's unbelievable.
They're great. They're really great.
Here's my thing. Again, I don't mean for you to do marital help for me, but this is our dinner table argument. So let's take a person in a gang more on the street corner selling drugs. As I tell my wife, you got to always find a job for a person without clearly post-high school, if you're not even completing high school, no job experience, an income that compete with that street life that they know. They know that life, they know the rules, they know what's expected, what's not expected, what they can and can't do, and what they shouldn't do because there will be violence. You cannot find a minimum wage job that's going to compete with the income of a street. And the question is, what's open? And to me, there's a couple things left. You talked about Freeman Seating.
Yep.
There's truck driving, logistics.
Yep.
There's a few sectors that still do not require a high school or more, but still can financially compete. And the other thing that I didn't know being mayor until this exposure, you can't ask them to go do a year, 2 years of training for. They got to be able to go make that income in 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks at max training.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they got too many pressures and family pressures and income pressure, wallet pressures.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. So, fun fact, the 380 guys that we have in READI Chicago, they all start making minimum wage and they all become my colleagues. They're all employees of Heart Alliance. That's a bold move right there for Heart to do that.
That's a very big move. Not many people do that.
Correct. So I have to give it to Evelyn about on that. Right. The second thing that I would say is
Which means it's ready-made rather than being a job service.
But the second thing that I would say behind that, Mayor, is that true, there are some people that are making more lucrative, on the street. But those are very few. When we think about how many people have denied READI because of they're making more money somewhere else, they're very few, which tells me that the gangs of today and the drug operations of today are very different when I was a kid growing up in Chicago in the early 1990s.
You mean the margins aren't what they used to be?
Well, the margins, the competition, or the demand for it also, that might be very different as it was, back in the early 1990s. So that's very different. It's something that I've been learning through this process. It's not to say that our guys are not necessarily doing that, but they're not doing it for the sense of like, I need to make a career out of this. They're like, hey, I need to figure out how to make ends meet.
This is too important now that my rabbi will kill me if I don't ask. So why did you use the term atonement? And then walk folks through what happened for you, what opened up, what chapter closed, why you decided to walk on this side of the road. So
I think it's imperative for me to mention this first thought.
Sure. In
the county jail, even after I was sentenced, and even when I was sent to Menard Correctional Center, one of the maximum prisons, I knew for the moment that I stepped into the county jail, I don't want to be the same person that I was when I came in. But you're also up against a lot.
This is your internal voice.
Yes, it's my internal voice.
Not external, nobody else. This is Eddie's internal voice.
Correct. And so this part of like, how can I be a better person? And at the same time, still kind of thinking through like, who am I? Like, I wasn't brought to this earth to have done all the things that I've done. And I've disowned my family, and there's all these different ideas, right, that come to mind. But at the same time, I'm in prison. I have to survive. Like, how do I navigate the prison system where I'm not, being abused myself? How do I, I tell people all the time, most of my fights in prison happen with my own guys. Because I don't believe
your own guys being your own gang.
My own gang. A lot of times because of people taking advantage of someone and so on. And so even then, I knew between right and wrong about some of these things. But several years later, as I was reflecting and I was in a better place to make decisions about myself with less consequences, I started up by just honoring July 17, like dedicating this day to this young man, William, who to this day, I hope at one point or another I'm able to meet the mother. And now I'm not advocating that I want to do this now, but at some point I want to be able to do that, just to kind of not only ask for forgiveness, but to let the mother know of the wrong that I've done. But as a result of that, this is what I've been able to accomplish in honor of her son. So July 17 is something that I dedicate, but the truth is, Mayor's like, I dedicate the rest of my life to do this, to honor those that I've harmed, including my own family. I don't want other families, other people to go through the same thing that I've experienced. And I also, one of the things that I'm hoping your listeners here today take away is that I don't believe that people are beyond reach. I think that every person is worth investment. I believe that it takes a certain kind of person to reach a certain kind of person as well. And even though I don't have all the answers to a lot of things in this world of violence prevention and so on, I do believe that in order to heal, right, like you have to be given the opportunity. And you also have to be very thoughtful about the process you take, because you also you create more harm than good in this journey as well. And I think in terms of my own life, I don't know how else I could ask for forgiveness if not by demonstrating my work here. Like, this is the only way that I feel that my God, right, even though people would say that God's forgiven you a long time ago, maybe that's true. And I would probably say, yes, it is true. But I have not forgiven myself. Because here's and this is my last thought.
Okay.
The Interrupters, public documentary. Alex Colliver's new book, right? One Summer in America, very, public book as well. I have 5 little girls. My little girls are growing up in a very affluent community right now. One day, their parents are going to look me up. Or one day, their parents are going to find out that my daughter's father did prison time, and not for purse snatching, but for murder. I'm going to have to grapple at that point that even the choices that I've made, even as an adult, even when I thought I was making the right choices, and I'm sure you could attest to this as a mayor, because you made many choices, and some people were fans of him, and some people were not.
You've noticed.
Just a little. Just a little. But part of the sacrifice is that. And it's unfortunate that some people might see my kids a certain way. But to me, that is part of the atonement. For me, it's part of the forgiveness or asking forgiveness. And I don't know how else I could do this. And I just hope that for families who lost their kids to violence, for people who lost family members to the justice system, my hope is that they see that there's hope and faith behind this, especially when we have, mayors like yourself, those that are coming, but also other people in this work to invest in this work.
I got 2 hours worth of questions, and now I know this is going to be, it's a little light given this conversation. This is to me one of the biggest grappling, family, prevention versus intervention, how people make a decision to change their life, and then where does it lead them to. And Eddie, I want to thank you, and I hope people can look up READI Chicago. If there's a way they can look it up.
Please, heartlandalliance.org.
Okay. Rapid round.
Let's go.
You ready?
Let's do this.
Okay. Thick or thin pizza?
Thick.
Okay. Cubs or Sox?
Cubs.
Lake or river?
River.
You just sucking up there on that one.
My grandfather's ranch, he had a river there.
Okay.
So.
Sears or Hancock Tower?
Sears.
Okay. 16-inch or 12-inch softball?
12-inch.
Okay.
Yeah, 12.
Right. Eddie, I want to thank you from READI Chicago, and I really want to thank you for giving back and helping. There's a great quote you should remember. Muhammad Ali. The service we give others is a rent we pay for being here on earth. And I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Eddie.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Emanuel. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet your guest ideas using #ShyStories. Thanks for listening.